A starving boy once looked at the woman who saved his life and whispered, "I'll pay you back someday." He was 8 years old. She didn't believe him. Mabel Hart gave that boy her last bowl of soup. She sold her wedding ring to buy his medicine. She worked until her hands cracked and bled, while neighbors called her foolish for taking in a stray. 20 years later, that promise walked back into her life, on the exact day she was about to lose everything. This is a story set on a dying farm where fence posts lane and soil runs dry. A story about what kindness plants in broken ground, about the debt that time cannot erase, and about one woman who discovered that the small hands she once held had grown strong enough to carry her. If these stories mean something to you, consider subscribing. It helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you about the day Mabel Hart found a boy at the edge of her field. The soil was cold under Mabel Hart's fingers. She pressed her palms flat against the earth. She felt the grit work into the cracks of her skin. This was her land, what was left of it. The farm had been shrinking for years, not in acres, in possibility. The fence leaned where posts had rotted through. The barn needed paint she couldn't afford. The silence pressed in from all sides. Mabel stood and wiped her hands on her apron. Her back protested. It always did now. She was 47 years old and felt decades older. She scanned the far edge of the property. The tree line cut a dark shape against the gray sky. Something moved there, not a deer, too small, too still. Mabel squinted. A shape crouched near the broken section of fence. Thin limbs, a pale face, watching her, a child. Mabel's hands went still at her sides. Her heart beat once hard. She had seen hungry animals on her land before, desperate things that came looking for scraps. This was different. The child didn't run, didn't come closer, just watched with the patience of something that had learned to wait. Mabel walked toward the fence, her boots pressed into the soft earth. Each step felt deliberate, heavy. The child's eyes tracked her approach. Up close, Mabel could see more, a boy, 8 years old, maybe younger, dirt caked into the hollows of his cheeks. His clothes hung loose. His collarbone jutted sharp beneath the fabric. He didn't speak. He watched Mabel the way a dog watches a stranger, ready to bolt, ready to take whatever came. "You hungry?" Mabel asked. The boy's throat moved. He nodded once, quick, like he expected the offer to disappear. Mabel turned toward the house. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She heard his footsteps following, light, careful, the sound of someone who had learned to move without being noticed. In the kitchen, Mabel set a pot on the stove. The room was clean but worn. Wallpaper peeled at the corners. The table bore the scars of decades. One chair sat crooked where the leg had cracked. The boy stood by the door. He hadn't sat down, hadn't touched anything. His eyes moved across the room, counting exits, checking shadows. "Sit," Mabel said. She pointed at the table. "I'm heating soup." The boy sat. His movements were careful, controlled. He placed his hands flat on the table. Mabel noticed his knuckles, scraped raw, old scabs layered over new ones. She didn't ask, not yet. Some things didn't need questions. They needed time. The soup warmed slowly. Mabel stirred it twice. The smell filled the kitchen, onion and salt and something close to warmth. She set the bowl in front of the boy. He looked at it, then at her, then back at the bowl. "Thank you," he said. His voice was hoarse. Unused, he ate fast, too fast. His spoon scraped the bottom of the bowl. When he finished, he sat back. His shoulders stayed tight. His eyes stayed on Mabel. "Thank you," he said again. "Thank you." Mabel refilled the bowl. The boy's hands trembled when he took it. He ate the second serving slower, like he was afraid it might be the last. That night the boy slept on the floor by the wood stove. Mabel offered him the spare room. He shook his head. She offered him blankets. He took one. He curled against the warm stones and closed his eyes. Mabel sat in the kitchen. She watched the doorway. The light from the stove cast moving shadows across the floor. She had been alone for 3 years, since her husband died, since the farm became a weight instead of a home. She had stopped expecting company, stopped leaving the door unlocked. Now there was a child sleeping by her fire, a child with scraped knuckles and careful eyes, a child who flinched when she moved too fast. Mabel's chest ached, not from sickness, from something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. In the morning, the boy was awake before dawn. He stood by the back door. His hand rested on the frame. He was ready to leave. Mabel walked past him. She pulled a rake from the corner. She held it out. "You want breakfast?" she said. "You help with the yard." The boy took the rake. His fingers wrapped around the handle. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but something close to hope. Days passed on Mabel Hart's farm. The boy worked beside her. He learned the pump handle's stiff resistance, learned which rows needed weeding. He learned the names of tools by their weight. Mabel watched him adapt. He was quick, quiet. He listened more than he spoke. When she showed him something once, he remembered. She learned things about him without asking. He flinched at loud sounds. He watched doors. He thanked her 3 times for every meal. His manners were too careful, too perfect. The kind of manners learned through punishment. "What's your name?" Mabel asked one evening. They sat on the porch. The sun was setting behind the fields. "Daniel," the boy said. Mabel nodded. She didn't ask for more. The rest would come when it was ready. Daniel. She turned the name over in her mind. It fit him. Simple, solid, a name that could grow. There wasn't enough food for 2. Mabel knew this the first week. She adjusted. Her portions got smaller. Her excuses got better. "I already ate. I'm not hungry tonight. This heat kills my appetite." Daniel believed her. He wanted to believe her, so he ate what she gave him, and Mabel watched him fill out, watched the hollows in his cheeks grow shallow. The money ran thin by the second month. Mabel sold the good shovel first. A man from town gave her $12. She spent it on flour and salt and medicine for the cough Daniel couldn't shake. The hand plow went next, then the extra lantern, then the chair with the cracked leg. Daniel noticed the empty spaces. He didn't say anything. But Mabel saw him looking, counting what was missing. At the general store, people talked. Mabel heard them through the aisles. "That Hart woman took in some stray, can barely feed herself. What's she thinking?" The clerk counted out her change slowly. His eyes asked questions his mouth didn't. Mabel put the coins in her pocket. She took Daniel's hand. They walked out together. The sickness came fast. One morning, Daniel was working the pump. By afternoon, he couldn't stand. His skin burned. His eyes went glassy. Mabel put him in her bed. She pressed wet cloths to his forehead. She watched his chest rise and fall, too fast, too shallow. The fever lasted 3 days. Daniel drifted in and out. He called out names Mabel didn't recognize. He cried in his sleep. He asked for someone named Sarah. Mabel didn't leave his side. She slept in the chair. She changed the cloths every hour. She prayed to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. On the second day, she walked to town, 4 miles on the dirt road. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, but Daniel needed medicine. At the pharmacy, the man behind the counter named a price. Mabel counted her coins. She was $3 short. She walked back outside. The sun was bright, too bright. Her head pounded. She had nothing left to sell, nothing except Mabel reached into her dress pocket. Her fingers found the ring, gold, thin, her husband's last gift. She had kept it hidden for 3 years, in a drawer, in the dark, safe from creditors, safe from need. Her fingers closed around the cool metal. She remembered his hands, his voice, the way he said her name. She walked back into the pharmacy. She set the ring on the counter. "This enough?" she asked. The pharmacist looked at the ring. He looked at Mabel. He nodded once. She walked home with the medicine in her pocket. Her finger felt bare, empty. The wind cut through her dress like it knew something was missing. Daniel's fever broke on the 4th morning. He opened his eyes. They were clear, focused, alive. "Miss Mabel," his voice cracked. Mabel was beside him. Her hand found his forehead. Cool, finally cool. "I'm here," she said. Daniel looked around the room, at the chair she'd slept in, at the pile of wet cloths, at her face drawn and gray from sleeplessness. "You stayed," he said. "I stayed." He closed his eyes again, not from fever, from something else. His hand found hers, small fingers wrapped around her rough palm. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Mabel said nothing. She just held on. Weeks passed. Daniel grew stronger. He returned to work. He laughed sometimes now, a sound that surprised them both. Mabel grew weaker. She hid it well. She went to bed earlier. She rested when Daniel wasn't watching. Her hands shook in the mornings. One night, Daniel's shoe sole came loose. Mabel sat by the lamp with needle and thread. Her fingers had gone stiff. The needle slipped. It bit into her thumb. She didn't stop. She pulled the thread tight. She stitched the leather back together. Her blood spotted the cloth. Daniel watched from the doorway. His eyes were too old for his face. "Miss Mabel," he said, "you don't have to done." Mabel held up the shoe. The sole held firm. She handed it to him. She didn't mention her thumb. Autumn came cold and early. Mabel and Daniel worked the last harvest together. The yield was small, enough to survive, not enough to feel safe. One evening they sat on the porch. The sky had turned purple. The fields stretched dark around them. Daniel watched Mabel carry water from the pump. Her steps were slower now. Her shoulders bent forward. She moved like the land itself, heavy, enduring. "Miss Mabel," Daniel said when she returned, "I wish I could do more." Mabel sat down beside him. The porch boards creaked. "You do plenty." "No." Daniel's voice had an edge, not anger, determination. "When I'm older, when I can do something that matters, I'm gonna pay you back." Mabel looked at him, 9 years old, thin arms, fierce eyes. "Pay me back for what?" she asked. "Everything." Daniel's jaw tightened. "The food, the medicine, the way you look at me like I belong somewhere." He paused. "Nobody ever did that before." Mabel's chest tightened. Her eyes burned. She didn't cry. She wouldn't cry. "That's not something you pay back," she said quietly. "I will though." Daniel looked out at the fields. His voice dropped. "I won't forget, I promise." Mabel watched his profile against the darkening sky. She didn't believe him. She couldn't. Promises from children didn't survive the years. They faded like footprints in dry soil, but she remembered the words. She held them in her chest like a stone. 2 years passed on the farm. Daniel grew taller. His voice deepened. He worked harder than any boy his age should. He called her Miss Mabel, and sometimes, when he forgot himself, just Mabel. Neighbors still talked. Some called her kind, most called her foolish. None called her for help. It was a Tuesday when the car appeared, late afternoon. The dust rose behind it like something being dragged. Mabel stood on the porch. Daniel was in the barn, organizing tools. He hadn't seen it yet. The car was black, long. The kind of car that cost more than Mabel's entire farm. It moved slowly down the dirt road, deliberate, patient. Mabel's hands found the porch railing. Her knuckles went white. The car stopped at the end of the drive. The engine cut off. The dust settled. A door opened. A man stepped out, gray suit, polished shoes that didn't belong on dirt roads. He carried papers in his hand. He looked at the farm, at the leaning fence, at the weathered house, at Mabel standing guard on the porch. Then he looked past her. His eyes found the barn, found the boy emerging with a rusted rake in his hands. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, something that looked like ownership. Mabel's heart pounded against her ribs. Her vision narrowed to that single figure, that single threat. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he wanted. But she knew, with a certainty that cut through her like winter wind, that he had come to take something away. The black car stopped at the edge of Mabel's driveway. Dust settled around it like a held breath. Tuesday afternoon light cut sharp across the hood. A man stepped out, gray suit, leather shoes too clean for dirt roads. His face carried the kind of patience that comes with lawyers on retainer. Daniel stood on the porch beside Mabel. His shoulders drew together. His fingers curled against the railing. The man didn't introduce himself. He spoke like someone reading from a script. "I'm looking for a boy named Daniel Mercer." He held up papers. "I'm his grandfather." Mabel's hand found Daniel's shoulder. She could feel him trembling beneath her palm. The grandfather explained without warmth. He'd been searching for months. Daniel's mother, his daughter, had died years ago. The boy had slipped through foster systems, group homes, empty lots. Now there was a legal claim, inheritance, custody, words that turned a child into paperwork. Daniel didn't look at the man. He looked at Mabel. "I won't go." His voice cracked on the second word. The grandfather's mouth thinned. "You don't have a choice." Mabel stepped forward. "He's been here 2 years. This is his home." "Ma'am," the word landed flat. "I have documentation. I have legal standing. You have neither." Her hands shook. She pressed them against her apron to still them. The grandfather promised schools, opportunity, a future Daniel couldn't have on a dying farm. He spoke like a man presenting a business case. The boy's welfare was just another line item. Daniel pulled free and crossed the yard. He stopped in front of Mabel. His eyes were wet. His jaw was set. "I meant what I said." His voice came out rough. When I'm older, when I can do something, I'll come back, I'll pay you back for everything. Mabel reached into her pocket. She pulled out a folded scrap of paper, her name, the farm's address, written in pencil that would fade. In case you need it, she said. Daniel took it. He pressed it flat against his chest. The grandfather's patience ran out. His hand closed around Daniel's arm. The grip wasn't gentle. We are leaving. Daniel didn't fight. He walked to the car like someone walking toward a sentence already handed down. The door opened, the door closed. The engine turned over. Mabel watched the black sedan roll down the dirt road. Dust rose behind it. The shape grew smaller. Then it was gone. She stood there until the road fell silent, until the dust settled, until her legs stopped holding her up. Then Mabel went inside. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The chair across from her was empty. She didn't move for a very long time. 20 years passed, not quickly, not gently. They passed the way water wears through stones, slow enough to ignore until everything has changed. Mabel's hair turned grey, then white. Her hands grew stiffer each winter. The work grew harder. But she kept the farm. She kept the land. She kept the porch light burning even when she stopped expecting anyone to see it. No letters came, no phone calls, no word from Daniel at all. She told herself rich people forget. She told herself he'd gotten busy with schools, with opportunities, with the life his grandfather had promised. She told herself a boy of 10 couldn't be expected to keep a promise made in tears. Some nights Mabel sat at the kitchen table and traced her finger over the empty chair. She remembered his voice, cracking and certain. I'll come back. But the years kept passing. The silence kept stretching. And slowly, the hope that had kept her porch light burning began to dim. Mabel Hart was 69 years old now. She woke up slower. She went to bed earlier. And she stopped looking down the road. The world outside her fence line changed. Paved roads crept closer. New houses went up where cornfields used to stand. The county rezoned land that had been farmland for 100 years. Property values climbed. Taxes followed. Mabel's neighbors, the same ones who had whispered about her taking in a stray, started selling. One by one, familiar farmhouses disappeared behind chain-link fences and construction signs. By her 60th year, Mabel was surrounded by progress. By her 65th, she was the last holdout on a road that used to have 7 working farms. The developers came next, men in clean trucks with business cards and clipboards. They smiled too wide. They talked too fast. They quoted numbers that sounded generous until she realized what she'd be giving up. Not selling. Mabel said it to the first man. She said it to the 5th. She said it to the ones who came back twice, who leaned against her fence like they already owned it. The offers stopped. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. One morning, 2 men arrived without knocking, county inspectors. They wore badges and carried clipboards thick with forms. They walked her property without asking. They pointed at her barn, at her well, at her porch steps. They wrote things down and took photographs. Mabel asked what they were looking for. They didn't answer. Weeks later, letters arrived. Official stationery with county seals. Words she had to read 4 times to understand. Non-compliant, structural concerns, remediation required. They wanted repairs she couldn't afford. They cited codes she'd never heard of. The farmhouse that had stood for 80 years was suddenly, officially, a hazard. Mabel went to the county office. She waited 3 hours in a plastic chair. She spoke to a clerk who shuffled papers. She spoke to a manager who wouldn't meet her eyes. No one could explain how her home had become illegal overnight. No one would try. She called the neighbors who had sold. Maybe they knew someone. Maybe they understood the system. Most didn't answer. The one who did sighed into the phone. You should have sold when you had the chance. The final notice arrived on a Tuesday. Mabel recognized the envelope before she opened it. Thick paper, red ink, the county seal pressed into wax that crumbled when she broke it. Eviction, 30 days. Officers would arrive at 10 a.m. on the date circled in red. She was allowed to remove her possessions before that time. After that, the county would handle the rest. Mabel sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had eaten his first meal, the same chair where she'd told a scared boy he could stay as long as he needed. 30 days. She pressed her palms flat against the wood. Her knuckles stood out white against skin grown thin as paper. No one was coming to help. Mabel tried to fight. She fixed the porch steps the inspector had cited. She patched the barn roof with boards she bought on credit. She filed papers she didn't understand and paid fees she couldn't afford. The court date got pushed back twice. Each delay let her breathe. Each delay let her believe this might go away. It didn't. The final letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. No more delays, no more extensions. The eviction would proceed as scheduled. Mabel read the letter standing at her mailbox. The paper shook in her hands. The words blurred together. She walked back to the house slowly. Her hip ached. Her knees protested. The distance from the mailbox to the porch had never seemed so far. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked through her house touching things. The kitchen table smooth under her fingers. The window where she'd watched a black car disappear. The drawer where her wedding ring used to wait. She stood in Daniel's old room. The cot was gone. The blanket was folded on a shelf. But the walls still held the faint outline of a picture he'd drawn, a house with smoke rising from the chimney. Her and him, stick figures holding hands. She traced the lines with her finger. The paper had yellowed, the crayon had faded. I'll come back. Mabel closed her eyes, her back pressed against the wall. Her legs slid down until she sat on the floor of an empty room. She had no one to call, no one to ask, no one who would come. The morning light found her still there, stiff, cold, alone. She heard the engines first, low rumbles growing louder on the dirt road. Mabel pulled herself up. Her bones protested. Her hands shook against the doorframe. She walked outside. The convoy approached through the early mist. 2 county trucks, a flatbed trailer for hauling, a white van she didn't recognize, all of them trailing dust like something coming to collect a debt that had finally come due. They were here to take her home, and Daniel was 1,000 miles away, 20 years gone. A promise faded to nothing. Mabel Hart stood on her porch and watched them come. She had nothing left to give, nothing left to fight with. The trucks rolled closer. The engines grew louder, the dust rose higher, and there was nothing at all she could do to stop them. The trucks stopped at the end of Mabel's driveway. Doors opened. Men stepped out into the Tuesday morning light. A deputy came first, papers in hand, badge catching the sun. Behind him, 2 workers in county uniforms. Then the inspector, the same one who'd walked her property without permission months ago. Clipboard pressed against his chest like armor. They didn't hurry, they didn't need to. Mabel stood on her porch. Her hands hung at her sides. Her knees ached from the sleepless night. The deputy unfolded his papers. He read aloud without looking up. Legal language, words like non-compliance and remediation failure and removal order. Words that turned her home into a problem. Her life into paperwork. Mabel listened. She had no choice. Ma'am, we'll need you to step aside. The deputy's voice was flat, professional. He was doing his job. The workers moved past her into the house. She heard them inside, boots on floorboards, drawers opening, things being lifted. They started with the chairs. They carried them out like furniture from a foreclosure, not objects with memories attached. Then the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had eaten his first meal. Where she told a scared boy he could stay as long as he needed. Mabel's voice came out thin. Please be careful with that. They didn't slow down. A frame slipped from a worker's grip. Glass cracked against the porch boards. Mabel looked down. Inside the shattered frame, a photograph of Daniel at 10 years old, standing by the barn, almost smiling. His face stared up at her from the dirt. No one bent to pick it up. One of the workers laughed, low, under his breath. Like this was just another Tuesday. The inspector made notes on his clipboard. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge that a life was being dismantled in front of him. Across the road, people had gathered, neighbors from the new houses, faces Mabel half recognized. They stood behind their fences, watching. None of them crossed over. None of them said a word. Mabel's chest tightened. Her breath came shorter. She tried to step forward, to say something, to stop this. Her leg buckled. She went down hard. Her knee hit the dirt first. Pain shot through her hip, her spine, her shoulders. She tried to push herself up. Her arms shook. She couldn't. Mabel Hart, 69 years old, alone, kneeling in the dirt of her own driveway, pressed her palms flat against the ground. Her fingers curled into the soil like she could hold the land in place by force. She couldn't hold anything anymore. The tears came. She'd kept them back for 20 years, through the silence, the loneliness, the slow shrinking of her world. Now they broke through without warning. Loud, uncontrolled, she hated it, hated that they would see her like this, in the dirt, crying. "Ma'am," the deputy stood over her, "you need to move." Mabel couldn't answer. Her throat closed around the words. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, low, rhythmic, growing louder by the second. Everyone stopped. The workers set down what they were carrying. The deputy's hand went to his radio. The inspector lowered his clipboard. The helicopter came from the east. It banked over the tree line, rotors beating the air, flat, black, sleek, expensive. It descended into the field behind Mabel's house like it owned the sky. The engine cut, the rotors slowed. A man stepped out. He was early 40s, dark jacket, clean shoes. He walked toward the eviction scene without rushing. His eyes moved across everything, the trucks, the workers, the deputy, the woman on her knees in the dirt. He stopped in front of the inspector. "Who authorized this action?" His voice was calm, controlled, the kind of voice that expected answers. The deputy started to speak, but the man was already reaching for the clipboard. "Show me your documentation, all of it." The inspector handed it over, confidence still in his posture, like he'd done this before. The man flipped through the pages. His expression didn't change. Then he stopped. His finger pressed against a line halfway down. "These signatures are copied." He turned another page. "These inspection dates overlap days your office was closed for holiday." Another page. "This court filing references a zoning amendment that never passed." He looked up. His eyes locked on the inspector's face. "This eviction is fraudulent." The inspector's face went pale. The deputy reached for his radio. The workers glanced at each other, uncertain. The man walked past all of them. He crouched beside Mabel. His voice dropped, soft now, careful. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Mabel looked up through tears, her vision blurred. Mabel Hart." The man inhaled sharply. His eyes closed for 1 second. When he opened them, his voice cracked on the edges. "It's Daniel." The name didn't register at first. Daniel was a memory, a thin boy on a porch. A promise made in tears 20 years ago. Not a man with gray at his temples. Not someone who arrived in a helicopter. Then she saw his eyes. Same eyes that had watched her from the edge of her field when he was 8 years old. The same eyes that had promised to come back. "Daniel," he helped her to her feet, gently, like she might break. "I'm sorry it took so long." His voice caught. "I tried to find you, my grandfather, he kept your address from me, changed my name, moved us constantly. It took years to track down what he'd hidden." Mabel stared at him. Her hand rose to his face, touched his cheek. "You came back." Daniel nodded. His jaw tightened. "I made a promise." The eviction stopped within the hour. Daniel made calls, names Mabel didn't recognize, names that made the inspector visibly nervous. Lawyers arrived. County officials followed. The trucks reversed down the driveway. Her belongings were carried back inside. Carefully this time. The deputy apologized 3 times before he left. The inspector said nothing at all. In the days that followed, auditors descended. Paper trails unraveled. Inspection reports had been forged, part of a pressure campaign by developers to force the last holdouts off valuable land. Charges were filed, deals collapsed. The people who had tried to take Mabel's home found themselves answering questions they couldn't answer. Daniel returned to the farm again and again. New equipment arrived, irrigation lines, a repaired barn, things Mabel had never been able to afford. He established a trust that protected the land permanently. No corporation, no county official could ever touch it again. One evening, they sat on the porch together. The sun went down over fields Mabel had nearly lost. "You kept your word," she said. Daniel shook his head. "I just showed up late." Mabel reached over. She took his hand, the same way she had when he was a scared boy who didn't know where he belonged. "You came when it mattered." Weeks later, on a clear morning, Mabel stood at the edge of the field. The soil turned under a new plow. She pressed her palms together, feeling the vibration travel through her arms. The earth was dark and rich, ready for planting. Daniel stood beside her, quiet, present. The boy she'd fed became the man who saved her. The promise stayed whole. That night Mabel went inside before dark. She left the door unlocked. She trusted the quiet. The porch light, the one she'd kept burning for 20 years, still glowed against the dusk. But now it wasn't a beacon for someone lost. It was just a light. Warm and steady, the farm breathed easy, so did she, finally without fear.